Welcome viewers to a detailed step-by-step Weavile Darkrai guide for the Shining Revelry expansion. The expansion's been out for roughly a week right now, and the metagame is developing to roughly what we think it will be for the rest of the month. And so I want to give you guys a nice guide for one of the most fun decks in the metagame, and it's also very fast, so you can get a lot of games in to climb those ranks to reach whatever ranked goal that you're looking for, whether it be Ultra Ball, Master Ball, or even above that. I wanted to make this guide in particular myself. I haven't actually made a YouTube video myself before, so welcome to the channel. My name is Great Balance, named after the balance of the game. It's very great, of course. And I feel that I have the opportunity to add something to the Pokemon Pocket YouTube content community by going into some detailed analysis of some games that I've already played in the past, rather than doing some live commentaries over games which are streaming games. And I feel that this kind of content isn't out there just yet on the Pockets community, and I feel that I will be able to fill this void for you lovely viewers that are more pragmatic with your learning when it comes to decks or any kind of skill in life. I'll go into the details of a lot of decision makings on a replay that I have against the most popular deck in the metagame right now, the Giratina and Darkrai EX deck that is taking the meta by absolute storm right now. Very, very backbreaking deck that gets two EXs set up at the same time, and you really don't, it's very difficult to play against that deck unless you're playing one of the other meta decks. And so I will give you guys a guide to navigate the matchup, navigate situations which are a little bit more difficult by giving you a baseline of and a mindset and an identity for the deck, which will help you in those decisions. So let's start with the list. The deck list is all tools, as you can see. This is what I used to make my final push to Master. I believe I made this change roughly, the last changes to this roughly when I was at 1350 ELO, and I got to 1450 actually fairly quickly after developing this deck. What I concluded was that in a Weavile, the identity of Weavile Darkrai is it's an aggressive deck. It wants to get out there and wants to start pumping damage as quickly as possible and overwhelm the opponent with continuous damage and continuous attacks. So, how do we build a deck around that strategy? We have to make the deck as consistent as possible, because if we are not, and especially in this current metagame where if you miss one turn, you are just losing against these decks which have just basic Pokemon which are ramping up, you really want to make sure that you are having your opening as often as possible, and you are making sure that you are having your early game cards in the early game when you need them as often as possible as well. This means cards like Leaf, because Leaf is very important when Darkrai is in the active spot. This happens quite often, right? So you want to make sure that you are able to take it out in time to start swinging for 90 or start swinging for 70 with your 20 damage on the Darkrai from the turn that you are able to start attaching on both. And then 2 giant capes to make sure that you are able to survive any dangerous situations in the early game, that your Weavile, that your Sneasel can get killed potentially. 2 communications. This increases the consistency of the deck dramatically, especially since this deck does not have a lot of Pokemon. I actually am more of a proponent of running 2 communication in a deck like this than in a stage 2 deck. Mainly because this deck has so few Pokemon that if you do get that communication, there's almost always going to be at least a 2/3 chance that you get exactly what you're looking for. And you run a second one, so in case you have both in hand, if you somehow lose the 2 and 3, and it's a 2 and 3 because, let me grab my EpiPen here. If you have a Pokemon in the active spot and say you have 1 on the bench or 2 in your hand, right? That means that you have 3 in the deck. You use communication on 1 of these. That means that, well, if you're using communication, that means that 2 of these are the same Pokemon, since you are obviously trying to draw for it because you don't have it in your hand. And then you are going to switch 1 out, meaning that 2 out of the 3 are going to be the Pokemon that you are looking for. And you can do that twice if you have 2 in your hand. But most of the time, 1 is enough. If you have 2 additional Pokemon in your hand, you are guaranteed to get the Pokemon that you are looking for. So having the 2 Pokemon communication to guarantee the early game that you really want is, I found, super critical. I tried Iona in the deck. Iono sucks. Iono doesn't suck for you. Iono sucks because it makes your opponent win the game. In a metagame where you already don't want your opponents to have more chances, and in a game where you really are just playing the cards whenever you can play them. You don't want to give your opponent an entirely new hand usually, because they would have already played the cards that they would have wanted to play usually beforehand. So Iono tends to not make sense because this deck is trying to undercut decks and get in before their strategies, and if you're helping them get their strategies, then that does not make sense at all. And the double Sabrina, it has mainly to do with the fact that when you are in an early game situation and you really want to hit something on the bench because otherwise the opponent is going to be evolving it to something that's going to just ruin your game, you want to have that Sabrina handy. Sometimes you'll have 2 Sabrinas in your hand and you'll be like, why do I have this? But a lot of times it will come in super clutch in the early game. This is the most flexible card in my opinion of the list, but I still found that running it 2 of it really helped stabilize the Gyarados matchup a little bit more, and also the Charizard matchup, as well as just being able to manipulate opponents' board a little bit more consistently if they were not getting the opening that they were looking for. Say you're against the Giratina Darkrai, they have only a Darkrai in the opening spot, they have the Giratina on the bench only, and they don't have anything else protecting it. You can bring the Giratina up, and then they're under a lot of pressure. So that's why I run 2 of those. 2 Cyrus is standard as well. It's the most stock standard deck that you can run pretty much of this deck, or stock standard list that you can run of this deck. And for me, it was what got me to the rank of Master Ball the most consistently and the most successfully. I mean, it is ultimately what got me there in the end, and I feel that the consistency is what really got me over the line with this and made it so that if you're playing hundreds of games, that you're not getting a headache, because there are some times where you're just having 5 games in a row of just bad openings, you know. Having a deck like this at least decreases those frustrations. Sometimes, sure, there are games where, like, you know, you don't have a Mars to win you a situation more often, or sometimes a Team Rocket Grunt would be nice. I found that this was the most successful. So now I have a replay to show you of one of the games that I've played against the Giratina Darkrai decks that I mentioned earlier. This is a very good game to show, I feel, because it has a crucial mistake that I make, which I end up not getting punished for, but I want to talk about it. And it also just has a lot of big decision-making turns after I get the initial setup done, which really help illustrate some of the situations that you, the viewer, might find yourself in, and you might be able to help navigate yourself out of in order to get a victory. And so here we go. Let's go ahead and play the replay. We are going to go second against this deck, which is always a good advantage. This is an Arceus variant, so let's just keep that in mind. He has pretty much the whole setup on his bench now. He started with the Nuts, he had the Darkrai and the Giratina setups. He does end up charging up his Arceuses, which I believe is the reason that he does lose the game in the end. However, this is not a deck guide on that deck, this is a deck guide on this deck, so I will only be talking pretty much on my perspective. So, turn 1. What do we know about Weavile Darkrai? What is the strategy? What do we want to do? We want to make sure that we have, by the time that we are attaching our second energy, we are able to hit for 90, or for a total of 90 damage per turn with the Weavile in the active spot by the time that happens. And that means that we need to be fishing for the cards that are necessary. Now, this game, it looks as if we have all the necessary tools to set that up, and so we don't need to be really fishing for anything. We just do the standard drawing for whatever we need to do, Pokeball into Professor's Research always when you have the situation. The only time ever with this deck that you will be playing Professor's Research before Pokeball into Pokeball, if you have Weavile in hand and you're looking for the other basic, then that is the time that you will Professor's Research before you Pokeball. If you don't have the Weavile in hand, always do this way. However, if you have the Weavile in hand and your Sneasel in the active spot, this is also something to consider. If your Sneasel is not in the active spot and you have to start with Darkrai in the active spot and you have Weavile in hand, you still want to Pokeball before Professor's Researching, because you're not actually fishing for Sneasel. You're fishing for Leaf. Leaf is the card that is most important if Darkrai inactive. Very important. If Darkrai is in your active, you must search for Leaf. There are very few ways that you can win a game without getting the Leaf off, The only way really is sacking the Darkrai, which is not very good. It will almost always lead to a loss, or it is by just charging up the Darkrai, and this is usually only viable from second against certain decks that are charging up an active Pokemon as well. It's very, very niche situations where you are not going to be trying to figure out a way to leaf out. Now, will that happen every time you have Darkrai in the active spot? No. And those games will feel incredibly frustrating. However, with 2 leaves in the deck, it's more often than not that you at least maximize the shot of that happening and minimize the chances of you having a bad early game, which will just lead to an auto loss at this point in this metagame if you're playing in the higher ranks. So we end up though with a hand where we will just do the regular professors. One thing I wanted to mention about the Pokeball. Consider holding Pokeball. And this is with any deck. Hold Pokeball if you don't have a guarantee of drawing the Pokemon that you're looking for. And this is usually when you're looking for Darkrai and you don't need to attach the energy to the Darkrai just yet. Wait, see if you draw the Darkrai or draw the other basic or draw the other Sneasel and then use the Pokeball to get the guaranteed Darkrai, or just wait until you're at the very last second where you absolutely have to have the Darkrai in your hand when you obviously don't have it and you only have Pokeball in hand, and then attach when you draw it and just hope to draw it, of course. This is just to maximize your chances of drawing what you need. There's a lot of little optimizations that you can do with holding Pokeball or using it after Professor's research, but the main thing is if you don't have Weavile in hand, don't even bother with that, and that usually will be what the case is. And if you don't have Leaf in hand with a Darkrai in the active spot, don't even bother that as well. So this should be very simple. Start with a research and just draw everything up. Small blunder. I should have played the Cape. Cape is going to most likely go on the Weavile regardless in this matchup, or in most matchups. Just naturally how it goes. You want to make sure your Weavile is surviving to the point where your Darkrai has at least 2 energy so that it can come in and keep attacking. This deck is about consistent pressure. It always wants to make sure it has Weavile in the active spot with 1 energy and then 2 energy on the Darkrai at least, so that you can continuously do 90 or 100 damage every turn instead of 90, 100, 100, instead of having a turn where you are skipping damage and then going into this. That is a huge loss of tempo if you are skipping damage on a turn, and so you do not want to be doing that. You want to make sure you are consistently attacking, so you want to make sure your Weavile is surviving to the point where it is surviving enough to where Darkrai has the 2 energy. And so I'm going to be playing Cape most likely regardless onto this card, onto this Pokemon, and that means that I should play it because of Mars. In the early game, there are 2 cards to play around that are extremely important: Sabrina and Mars. These 2 cards can instantly ruin your game. This is an early game deck, as I said, and you need to have a proper early game to maximize your shots of winning the match. And your opponent can do quite a few things to ruin this, and they will be looking to do this as well, especially if they have experience playing the deck and know how to play against it as well. So, but you know that most of these decks will run 2 times Sabrina, 1 times Mars. In fact, all these decks run like this pretty much, if not 0 Mars. So the first thing to play around is always Sabrina, which is why I don't play Darkrai. If I had a Leaf in hand, I would actually play Darkrai out, because I have the Leaf in hand already, so I wouldn't be punished by this. And this is as long as I'm not looking to play another supported card next turn, which maybe I am because I have the research in hand, right? However, I can always just research the next turn. That's not necessary. This is more important if I was looking to Sabrina something important the next turn. If he had only this on the bench and none these 2 on the bench, then I would actually not play this even if I had the Leaf in hand, because if he does Sabrina me, and it's more likely he Sabrina's me than Marses me. It's just more likely. It simply is the case. He is more likely to have it than the Mars, just because they run more copies. Then I can sure leaf out and have the situation to be attacking, but I really want a Sabrina to start attacking this. And so I wouldn't play this out, wouldn't leave myself susceptible to an enemy Sabrina, wouldn't leave so that I have to leave the next turn, and so I can Sabrina and deal 90 to the important target next turn. Obviously, he has all this stuff, and so I don't need to worry about that, and I don't have the Leaf in hand anyway, so I can just afford to not play the Darkrai, not worry about it. But I should have played the Cape, since losing a 6-card hand is worse than losing a 5-card hand with Mars, right? So that's fairly common sense. That's one blunder that I hope that you, the viewer, do not make in the future in your games. But always keep in mind, with your presence of mind of Mars and Sabrina in the early game, make sure that does not ruin your game immediately on turn 1 or 2 before you even get to play the game. Let's continue. Oh, I skipped very quickly. So he now is just attaching to a bench Arceus and then ramping up his Giratina continuously. I drew a cape, doesn't really do anything. Sabrina doesn't do anything here either because he has 2 guys protecting the important target, and he could just bring this in, for example. It does the same thing as taking damage on this. I know that I am looking to make the combo regardless anyway, and so I can just draw. I do end up playing the Darkrai for some reason before. I should have just drawn the cards first and then made my play, since I would have all the information. Regardless, that was going to happen anyway this turn, and so it doesn't really matter that much, but good force of habit is to always draw first, then to make your play, if that is what you plan on doing, right? If you're planning on Sabrina in, don't play this, because then you can't do this. So make sure that you are playing your draw cards if you plan on playing your draw cards before you do anything else. Since, you never know what you can draw. It could potentially change your action for the turn, or help you plan your future turns, more importantly. So I go ahead and continue with that play. I research, blah blah blah, do the 90. You should know that this is the way to play the deck. This is very simple. This is where it gets tricky. My opponent has Sabrina, and this is where it was actually important not to do the Darkrai play initially, because he would have done that and then I really would be screwed because I wouldn't be able to get the 90 damage off on this Arceus. Now, he is going to Sabrina me. You will see that in just a moment. You will see these 2 swap spots and then keep attaching. Doesn't really do much otherwise, right? But this is where I'm in a tough situation. So this is the most crucial turn in the game, and there's, in my opinion, a lot to learn from in this turn. I have gone back and forth between multiple decisions in this turn, and I believe I finally have landed on the correct way to play it because of mainly red. Red is so difficult to deal with for this deck. The HP totals are just enough to the point where if you're against this deck, if they have if they have the ability to just do the Darkrai, if they already have the energy on this, energy hit 130 plus the 20 from red is 170. It kills everything even the cape in this deck. It's so difficult to deal with, and you can play around it as much as you want. At a certain point you will probably lose to it anyway, and that's what this situation is. If he already has a red in hand right now, this situation is a guaranteed loss since I don't have leaf in hand. I'm not going to be able to pressure him continuously. There's always going to be 1 turn open of attacks, and so if he has a red in hand, chances are the game is over. It's the best way to negate that actually would be to attach here and then pass, attach here again, attack, and then this gets redded. This will attack, but hopefully you will have a Darkrai off the top. Hopefully they just don't have a Sabrina and maybe you can survive. Hopefully they don't have a second red. That is the potential way of doing it, and why ultimately, in my opinion, after a long thought process on it, attaching and passing is correct. Because the 2 options are attach and pass or attach and retreat. And attaching and retreating, obviously attach and retreat and then attack obviously would be the play. But the reason that that's worse is because it makes it so that it gives the opponent one more turn to have red. We've already concluded that if he already has red in hand, the game is tough. The game is already very, very difficult situation. However, if he does not have a red in hand right now, I can manipulate the state of the game to where if he does draw red later in the game, I can manipulate it to where he needs to draw it as soon as possible rather than later. And if I go with this and retreat, it gives him first turn, second turn, 3 turns to draw a red in order to one-shot my Darkrai on the bench. Instead, if I go for this particular play and I go for the pass play, that means that assuming that he doesn't have a leaf, he needs to just pass, attach, and then I will attach an attack and kill, or attach whatever. Sabrina doesn't actually matter that much in this particular situation in the end, in the grand scheme of things. It forces him to be able to have to come in next turn, so in 2 turns, not 3 turns, with the red and kill this. If he does not kill this with the additional damage of this and red, that following turn the game is over and I have won unless he has a Mars, right? But because I have Cyrus to just bring in the low target if he decides to escape and do something else, right? However, if he does have the red, then still the game isn't necessarily over, because sure, this dies. However, this comes in, it has an energy already attached, and if I draw my my second Darkrai, I can still attack this attacker for 90, and unless he has a second red or a second Sabrina, he is still not in a position to necessarily win the game. In fact, he's not in a position to win the game. So it is, after a long drawn out thought process, I've concluded in this situation it's almost always better to just attach and wait, because ultimately you're going to give your opponent a turn of not attacking anyway. You might as well make it right now and make it so that the turns that you are attacking are consecutive. Now, this does get punished by one thing, Leaf. And what happens? Leaf. And now I'm really on the back foot. So now, being on the back foot, I need to navigate this in a way that I can still win the game again, right? There's still an opportunity to win the game. It's not over. He still may not have the cards that he needs, right? In this situation, he still needs red technically to win the game, because he hasn't actually attached here with the passive because he wanted to attack. Meaning that, I mean, not necessarily that he needs red to win the game, but depending on what I do, if I go for the attach play and just attack instead of retreating, then it makes it so that it gives him 2 turns to draw a red to kill the Weavile, and it also makes it so that I need to draw my Darkrai next as well to start pumping my damage. Not necessarily actually, because I have the Cyruses to do with damages, to damage Pokemon, but just something to think about as well. But mainly, what I'm doing right now is I'm putting his red on a timer. If I were to just do this and attack, it makes it so that, yeah, he can attack, attach, that's fine, right? And then this comes in, and then sure, it can kill the Arceus, but then the Giratina comes in and then has a chance to kill this with the Darkrai and the red. What happens if I do this? If I just do this and then retreat and then go in. I have the Leaf as well, which makes it easier. Ultimately, that's not necessary, because if he's able to kill this turn, then I lose anyway. But this makes it so that he has to have red next turn instead of the turn afterwards in order to win the game. Or else, what will happen is that what he could do is attach here and then attack for 130. This is going to deal 150 to my guy, and then this guy will be dead because I've done a 90 twice to him. And then his best, this is adaptable to Sabrina, but I've already seen a Sabrina and I've not seen a red yet, right? So I want to play more around red than Sabrina. And if I've not seen red, these decks usually only run 1 Dawn. The only way that he wins if he doesn't have the red next turn and I do this is if he attaches, hits me for 130, and then I'm at 10. He attaches again after bringing it to the active spot after I kill this, and then has a Dawn. This deck tends to not run Dawn nowadays, and also if it runs it, only runs it as a 1-of. I know I'm still expecting 2 reds, and he might have it in hand. If he has it in hand, great, right? There's not too much that I can do, unfortunately. I lose anyway. But if he doesn't have it in hand right now, it makes it so that at least I put his red on a timer for next turn. Dawn, I'm not going to play around that much. It's more important to play around the red. And the way that I do it, of doing this and then retreating and then attacking, makes it so that he has to have red next turn without a Professor's Research chance in order to get it. And ultimately, you will see after the replay. And by the way, the Leaf is not necessary. As I said, I play it in the end because I don't really need to not, right? Because there's not any other support I want to play, so I might as well. But it doesn't matter, because even if I hadn't, I could still attach next turn because this thing is going to survive. If it dies, I lose the game anyway, right? So it doesn't really matter. He ends up having to Professor's Research because he doesn't have it, and then this should be a win secured as long as he doesn't have the Mars. And as we see, I just play my Pokemon out because I might as well, just for the sake of it. But yeah, the Giratina is going to come in and kill. This wasn't at 10 because he didn't attach here this turn. He attached, or last turn, he attached here last turn, so it was at 30. Ultimately, Dawn would have made it so that this attachment and this attachment and attacking may have worked, but he may not be running Dawn in his deck. I was mostly playing around the red draw the following turn. That was the main, or the turn afterwards. That was the main thing I was playing around. I end up getting rewarded for my efforts and winning the game from here. This is a very navigable win. As you can imagine, I have 2 points. I have the Cyrus. He doesn't have red. He doesn't have Mars. It is over. I can win the game from here. After he attacks with the Giratina. So I hope this gives you a good insight on how to play and how to strategize with this deck in order to win. The main thing is just constant pressure and making sure you are positioning the early game pieces to where you don't get screwed by certain other early game tools that your opponent might have. Hopefully you found this enjoyable. If you did, drop a like, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to making more of these in the future for your viewing pleasure.